Good evening. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral here in San Francisco, California. Welcome to the Forum Online. David Kim is a professor of religious studies and American studies, the author of Melancholic Freedom, Agency and the Spirit of Politics, and has been called by Cornel West the leading philosopher of religion and culture of his generation. He is founder of Radical Love Productions, a media platform dedicated to building a common culture, dedicated to social justice, and to living our best moral selves. Each year, the Cathedral chooses a theme for inspiration and reflection, and in 2022, our theme is connection. Tonight, we'll be talking about cynicism, racism, and violence, and the radical love it takes to see the humanity in others and to reach across to bridge that gap. David, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, what a blessing it is to see my old friend here. You have an eclectic resume. In addition to what I just mentioned, you're a classically trained musician. For over 15 years, a creative consultant for David Dorfman Dance and president of a major hospitality group, widely recognized as a tastemaker and entrepreneurial innovator in the restaurant industry. So how do all those things fit together in one person?
Well, I don't know if they fit together. I think I think it gets a little distracted, but yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's so good to see you.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see you as well.
Yeah. David and I have been friends since the early 90s. And he's someone who I admire very much. I remember you and I were standing outside of Rockefeller Hall after a seminar of some sort. And we were each talking about like publishing houses where we would like to be published.
That's right.
And it was great because I was just learning and being formed about what kind of intellectual I was going to be.
And you've become quite the intellect.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So radical love. Tell us a little bit about radical love. Like, what does it mean, and how do we begin to embody that kind of perspective in our own life?
Well, radical love is not just a way of seeing the world, but being in the world.
Yeah.
It's a demand that we love ourselves enough to let things in us die in order to live. And you know this as a theologian and as a pastor that has resonances with the Christian traditions.
Yeah.
That we have things in us that we think are indispensable to who we are.
Yeah.
And those can be covetousness and a kind of
protecting the ego.
Yeah, protecting the ego, but also, even things like, well, I need to pursue these interests.
Right.
That's who I am.
I'm a surfer, and as soon as you get arthritis and you're not a surfer anymore, what are you?
This is true. Well, as you said, I was a violinist.
Right, completely.
And when I recognized I wasn't really that good, I had to let that go. But the point of radical love is that it's really the core of what makes us human.
Yeah.
And to understand that there's a love in us that we have to strive for, aspire to, cultivate, be vigilant about.
Yeah, I love that. Cornel West has had a huge influence on me. I mean,
and me as well.
Yeah, but you were so much closer to him, and Cornel West recognizes your talents as a philosopher and your deep connection to religion. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your relation with him and just kind of like what you've learned from him. And I'll tell you a little bit what I learned from him.
Sure, please.
So I took that class on Schopenhauer, Hume, Erasmus.
Yep.
I can't remember the fourth figure. The last figure was the Josiah Royce. So that a small seminar class with him, and so talking to him about pessimism, like how powerful despair is a kind of almost like an opponent to us being able to be fully actualized as human beings.
Right.
So anytime any of those topics come up, and I can see things through a Schopenhauerian lens in a way that I think has just been really helpful for me. Yeah. So, but that's, like I said, I have such a, compared to you who saw him every day on a daily basis, for so many years. Yeah. I mean, he must have had so much more of an influence on you and your thinking.
Well, I mean, I would say that I would not be the intellectual, the human being that I am without Cornel.
Yeah.
I've said this about him many times. I mean, he really saved my intellectual life. Yeah. In many ways, he's my spiritual brher.
Yeah.
And I just saw him a couple of days ago in New York.
I heard that in New York City, right?
Yeah, and it's funny. Every time I see him, he was very gracious. I was sitting in a class of his, and he lengthens the amount of time we've known each other. So this time it's like, we've known each other for 35 years. I said, Cornel, I would have been 15.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But, we met at a time where I was very unsure about my prospects as a graduate student, as someone who was going to pursue things like philosophy of religion and theology. And he instilled in me and not instilled in me, I guess he showed me what it could be like to be an intellectual, what it should be like, which is to say, kind of an inveterate curiosity. But combined with a sense of humility. It's never that you have kind of a mastery over a canon. But then also saying, look, this comes out not because we're trying to demonstrate our mastery of a canon or knowledge of books, but it comes out of the traditions that made us. So for him, it's the Black freedom struggle. He'll say about his parents and his grandparents and so on, and I would say that about my own family. But to find this kind of conjoining of traditions, where he embraced me as somebody that understood the virtues and values of the Black freedom struggle, and felt the deep connection between that and studying Schopenhauer, right? Studying Hume, studying Kant, all those things. That intellectual work isn't done just for its own sake, but it's for the sake of deepening our humanity. And I continue to learn from him. I would not have come to my own understanding about radical love if we're not for this this decades-long conversation between the two of us.
Yeah. I wonder if you can explain a little bit to me, like what makes him such a compelling force in just popular culture? Like, we've had so many different teachers, and we've seen so many lecturers come through Harvard. So why is it that he so captures the public imagination?
He has an ability to speak to very basic human concerns. In ways that both challenge people and inspire them. And I've said this to him many times, that I find that he has this amazing ability to engage what I call intellectual shorthand. So he might talk about Hume, or he might talk about Josiah Royce, but make it relevant to somebody on the street. Make it relevant to somebody who doesn't have any background in that, and piques that curiosity. I mean, his ability to speak to everyday people and again, it's not about translating ideas, but it's about connection. It's about and he has a heart for it. He has a real heart for people. And I continue to learn from him.
My experience is the same completely. And I have congregants who are African American who are very upset about his the critical things he would say about Barack Obama, for instance, when he was president. And it was really hard for me to just talk about it is his calling to say things that are difficult things.
Well, I mean, that's the prophetic tradition.
That's exactly right. That's what I tell them.
Right. I mean, he wouldn't do what he does. You wouldn't do what you do if it were not for the fact that we feel a call. And the calling demands that we show up in the world in particular kinds of ways, that we bear witness, we tell truth to power. And hopefully we tell truth to power with love. And we do, so even when he was critical of Obama, it wasn't a personal affair, but it was born out of a sense of indignation that a higher purpose and a higher call wasn't being met by that particular person.
And the pointed issue is extrajudicial killings by a government. That government can, without a trial, sentence someone to death by assassinating them in a foreign soil.
No, that's right.
And I just don't understand why people weren't more sympathetic to that point. I mean, it's just like we believe in the rule of law here in the United States. So, do we just not live by the rule of law when it comes to citizens of other countries?
Well, but I think folks confuse affection.
Yeah, that's true.
And admiration. And that will cover, just to use a term, sins.
Yeah.
Right. And for all the laudatory things that Obama did, he did things like
Right, completely.
drone strikes.
Yeah,
and
exactly. And I mean, me personally, I've never seen a politician who I identify more with. Just we grew up in the same time.
Sure.
We have the same interests.
Yeah.
We have the same connections to Hawaii.
Yep.
And you're right. You can be critical of somebody and still respect what they're doing. And
I'll put it another way. You can love somebody enough,
right.
and your love will demand that you be critical of them
Yeah.
because you need to serve as a kind of conscience.
Yeah.
And what Cornel was doing regarding Obama, or what any of us would do, whether it's a government, whether it's policy, or whether it's folks in our family,
Yeah.
we do that out of an obligation for our love for them.
Yeah, exactly. And if we didn't care, we just wouldn't make waves. We just,
That's right.
just ignore it. Just don't talk about that at the dinner table.
Yeah, no, that's
what
right.
have you.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right.
It's funny, when we first went to Harvard, Ari Goldman had written that book, The Search for God at Harvard.
right.
I don't know if you read it, but I haven't thought of it. And for some years, it just popped in my head. But, the students that he knew, like I knew some of those students, the teachers, we knew all the teachers. I wonder if you can talk about just what was it like when you first arrived in that setting to study religion at that level
Well, we're classmates, right?
Yeah.
And to be there was exhilarating. It was challenging. I used to joke that walking around Cambridge, I experienced two things. One, everyone walked around with an invisible stick against which they measured you.
Completely, that's totally right.
To find you, falling short.
Exactly.
But also, it was demanding in often the best sense.
Yeah.
I mean, if I think about the teachers that I experienced, whether it was Cornell or Stanley Cavell, they're extraordinary minds.
Oh yeah, Stan Cavell is amazing.
Yeah, and it was a real privilege to spend time and to bring concerns about religion, about faith, about piety, about morality, about connection, and not do it as a pure philosopher, as it were, but saying, we ask these questions because we're concerned about meaning, and we're concerned about the breakdown of meaning. So the Goldman book, you enter a place like Harvard Divinity School not because you're looking for God. You're going to Harvard Divinity School because you're looking to ask better questions.
Yeah, right. For me, it was faith-seeking understanding.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, what was it like for you?
My grandfather had gone there in the 30s.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so every time I walked into Andover Hall,
Yeah.
I run my hand down the banister, and I just
Wow.
imagine him doing the same
Wow.
thing.
Wow.
And he died before he knew I had any interest in this.
Yeah.
And so I did feel like this strong kind of familial connection.
Wow.
And it's funny because part of your project in Melancholic Freedom is just like, what is the role of religion kind of in modernity and post-modernity?
Mm-hmm.
And I firmly believe that human beings are just spiritual beings.
Yep.
And so it just, the mission statement of Grace Cathedral, for instance, is reimagining church with courage, joy, and wonder.
Oh, that's
and
beautiful.
that is,
That's
so
beautiful.
yeah, it's beautiful. We take part of the tradition, and we have to, every generation has to figure out and decide what parts of the tradition are we going to carry forward, and in what ways do we have to adjust to the current situation. And so I felt like it was a place that was going to give me tools that I would need to really be able to talk about faith in an intelligent way, in a way that made sense to people in the 21st century.
Right. Well, and I think, I've heard you preach a few times.
Yeah.
And have been moved by the sincerity in which you probe your congregants.
Yeah.
And I think, we're in an age where, and I hate to say this, but, sincerity is a rare thing.
Oh, you're so right.
And, and I think as I get older, I recognize that I'm not looking to be critical. When we were graduate students, you're often kind of looking to be critical just to be critical.
Yeah.
Who can score a
It was
point
almost
off
the defense. The definition of being smart was to be critical.
Right, and you want to score a point off a professor. Or something
Yeah.
like that. But for me now, it's like, can I ask a better question?
Yeah.
And can I ask a better question that is not just important for me, but relevant for other people? Yeah. And that's amongst the greatest gifts of having an education like that, where we received a kind of training, but also took in a kind of ethos about that as one of our calls.
Yeah.
Right, we're driven to ask better questions.
Yeah, and Transcendence. One of the things I love about your book, and one of the things I love about Charles Taylor, is just transcendence has an important role in not just like, a few pious people's lives, but I mean, in all of the human experience.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, those moments of transcendence are transformative. And, I think sometimes that like bad arguments about religion are kind of barrier to like people having a fully human experience. And so I do think that's part of our calling, just as scholars of religion, is to help clear away things like bad reasons for not believing or bad reasons for not being connected to a kind of transcendence.
Well, but also connecting the idea of transcendence to experiences outside of the church.
Yeah, completely.
Right. So if you think about the great freedom movements,
Yeah,
the freedom movements weren't striving just for social freedoms, but if you think about it, they were looking for spiritual freedom.
yeah,
And spiritual freedom is all about transcendence.
yeah, completely.
Right? So that you're not so encumbered by the world that you feel stuck, that you don't see horizons of possibility.
Yeah,
And without some sense in which transcendence is possible for us, I don't think any of us would have access to even imagining freedom for ourselves.
yeah. Max Weber talking about capitalism as the iron cage. You were so right in what you were talking earlier about, we're not old, but we're starting to have like a little bit more of like a perspective in time.
Yep.
And I do see, the powers of that capitalist way of looking at the world just gaining so much more power and so much more control over our general psyche. And even just in terms of our hours. I mean, I don't think that people are not participating in church and Elks Club and bowling leagues and softball leagues and all the things that people used to. They're not participating in those things. They haven't scaled back participation in those because they don't believe in softball anymore. They don't believe in bowling. They don't believe in church. It's much more that their work lives almost don't allow them anything. There's almost no room outside of your work life. And there's a way in which it kind of colonizes our whole self. And it means that we're not as good citizens either. I think that we'd be more involved in the process of the civic processes if we weren't so wrapped up in our job at Airbnb.
Well, I it's good to know that you're working at Airbnb as well as Grace Cathedral. But I was in the drive over here. I was thinking about your work in Thoreau.
Yeah.
And one of the powerful things that Thoreau teaches us is this idea of nextness.
Yeah.
And nextness isn't just about what's going to happen next, but nextness is proximity.
Right, completely.
And so what's a proximity that we have to other people or not? What's a sense of neighborliness that we have with others or not?
Yeah.
And you could be next to somebody and yet be very far away from them.
Yeah.
And so your point about whether it's bowling or other kinds of things, we do these things alone or we do them together with a sense of common spirit.
Yeah.
But a common spirit is something that you have to cultivate, a sense of openness with others.
Yeah, I love that. That's from Stan Cavell's The Senses of Walden. It's just an amazing book. I remember sitting in his office so many hours and talking about things like that. I miss him very much. What professors that you had or teachers that you've had since then who've kind of influenced you? Apart from Cornel.
I mean, Cavell was, he was not my teacher proper.
Yeah.
I met him after I'd gotten my degree. We actually did a panel together.
Oh, that's that's great. That's cool. So you're like his colleague. I was his student.
Well, I think I was still his student at that point. But I was, I had read him for years.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
But the spirit in which he dwelled in ideas, which I would say is almost kind of a playfulness.
Yeah, completely.
Which I think also was born out of the fact that he was a jazz musician at Berkeley.
Completely.
Like as a young man, and so he had that kind of commitment to improvisation around ideas.
Yeah.
And so the way he wrote about the American spirit, right? The way he talked, the way he wrote about the kind of possibilities of what we could have. I mean, I miss that kind of tenor of philosophy. I miss that kind of tenor of intellectual work. Because I don't know, maybe I should read more widely, but I'm struck by people's needs to be, this kind of drive to be right, as opposed to a drive to want to play.
Yeah, right. I love that. That's a great way of, and I think of teachers like Dick Niebuhr,
Oh, sure.
Gordon Kaufman, Francis Fiorenza,
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, Margaret Miles is like, it was with me. I mean, she's like a voice in the back of my head
I
all
love
the time.
Margaret. I love
Yeah,
her.
I mean,
Yeah.
but what a gift it is to be able to experience, at least like anytime I approach a theological or religious
Mm-hmm.
question, at least I know in my head what these living teachers
Mm-hmm.
I had thought of it. Then I studied Calvin and
Mm-hmm.
Kant and Schleiermacher enough to have a sense for what these historical figures think
Yeah,
of
yeah.
it too.
Well, amongst my most important teachers at Harvard was Dewey Ming,
Oh yeah,
a
right.
scholar of
Oh, he's
Confucianism.
amazing. Yeah,
And,
completely.
he opened up the Confucian horizon to me, even, as someone who didn't have the language for it, and really invited me into, much in the same way that Cornell did.
Yeah.
He invited me into that world, and I have a deep gratitude to him for
Yeah.
that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that Confucianism is. I think it's part of your distinctive voice as a
Mm-hmm.
teacher and as a philosopher of religion.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you can talk just a little bit about just like how that voice, how you found that voice,
Mm.
and when I was talking to Greg Kimura, our
Yeah.
former colleague,
Yeah,
about
yeah.
you coming here today, he was talking about Francis Fukuyama's
Mm-hmm.
thesis about it's not going to be capitalism versus communism
Right.
anymore. It's not going to be Christianity versus Islam anymore.
Right.
It's going to be like liberal democracy and Confucian hierarchicalism
Yeah,
is
yeah.
is that. So I mean, so where are you in just terms of just how those Confucian ideas and ideals are becoming kind of alive in North America?
Well, I think for myself, I'm not who I am if it were not for my upbringing as I wasn't told, by the way, young David, you're a Confucian.
Yeah, yeah.
But I was raised in these practices of reciprocity and senses of filial piety, where we hold a sense of accountability and responsibility for each other. Marry that with my Christian faith, where that sense of responsibility and accountability for others is really born out of love. And so, I continue to struggle and wrestle with this relationship between love and ethics.
Yeah.
How to, and the bonds that are made out of each of those. And, and when you asked me about Cornell and I talked about the Black freedom tradition, I understand that the bonds that made the Black freedom tradition found their way into my life.
Yeah.
I'm a first generation immigrant.
Yeah.
My family does not come here if it were not for the fact that the Black freedom tradition
Right.
opened up
Totally.
immigration.
Yeah.
And so then I have a responsibility. So you ask about the resonances or the place of that in contemporary America. I have a responsibility for not just to remind people of that legacy, but to live that legacy, to bear witness to that. I mean, we're at a time where the Civil Rights Acts of '65, the Voting Rights Act, the Immigration Naturalization Act, other civil rights acts are being dissembled actively.
Yeah.
And you talk about a need for radical love. I mean, one of the things that we need to come to terms with America, as Americans, is the fact that we're not in perpetual progress.
Yeah. Completely.
But what do we do in the face of regress?
Right.
What do we do in the face of reaction
Right.
and
So
backsliding?
true. And especially, I mean, when progress is almost our religion.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's part of the liberal tradition. Because of my proximity to the Hawaiian Renaissance.
Sure.
I just think of how much of my life too. You're right. Has been reawakened through these freedom struggles around the world, anti-colonialism, civil rights here in America. And my access to some fundamental truths of human life it has been made possible by this. And even just like the anti-miscegenation laws. I mean, those the way I'm living. I mean, when Martin Luther King says, "I have a dream," I'm not living the perfect fulfillment of that dream, but I'm living a lot closer to it than many people may have been.
And we have to keep telling the story
Yeah.
that the American dream has an American nightmare.
Exactly.
As its
Totally
flip side.
wrapped up in it. Yeah.
And the American nightmare is pronounced and expressed in more consistency and constancy in American history than the American dream.
Right. Completely. Yeah.
And, what we're seeing coming out of the Supreme Court,
Oh,
what we're saying,
yeah.
you know, you talk
I
about.
wonder if you could even talk about that a little bit. I mean, so for people who are our viewers, it was last night. Was it last night that
Yeah,
the
2 nights ago,
Supreme
yeah.
Court, a leaked document from the Supreme Court, had a preliminary ruling about Roe v. Wade, and it looks very much like the abortion framework legal framework is about to be utterly changed. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just what your responses to that were, and maybe too just about how your education has kind of changed the way that you might look at that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I felt it as shock. I mean, in some ways, it's kind of an
You felt like it's on its way.
well, and there was a kind of inevitability to something like this, whether it's the constitution of the current court or the constitution of the current population.
Yeah.
And, it's a terrible thing that's happening. And
Yeah, but I think like 30% of Americans like want to restrict abortion, and 70%, are want to have laws that protect women. So it is like a minority voice that all of a sudden is.
well, but I think less. My view of it is it has less to do with whether it's a minority voice or a majority voice.
Yeah.
But whether it's the right thing to do or
Right.
not.
Completely.
And we're at a moment where, you could feel like, well, there's nothing to be done. The court, the Supreme Court is stocked in a certain kind of way.
Yeah.
But we can do more than that.
Yeah.
And my hope is that people understand this as not just a moment of defeat, but a moment of empowerment.
Right. Right.
And that, it's not just taking to the streets. It's not just re-articulating and re-upping a fight.
Yeah.
But it's also a severe reminder to us that no advance is permanent,
Right.
that no right is permanent, that we have to constantly be vigilant around the protection of who we are and protection of each other.
Yeah.
We can't take these things
No,
for
I mean,
granted.
for me, it's just marriage equality is just immediately I
That's right.
worry about.
Well, the love, and you mentioned this, the loving case and all these things.
Exactly.
Like,
Oh my
they,
gosh, completely.
they
You
could
can go
get
all the
knocked
way
out.
back.
Right.
Yeah.
And so legal advances are essential,
Yeah.
but they're not complete.
Right. Exactly.
And
you're right. We're always changing. And
we're always changing, and people's hearts don't change permanently either. Right? And so, again, like building a culture such that we are more morally vigilant, we are more publicly loving, is essential.
Yeah, it's so true. It's interesting too. I mean, it's just an important reminder too that we're the adults now.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And we drive on roads that were built by other people, and we inhabit buildings that were built by other people. But it's our time to make our contribution, and this is part of the way that we do that.
Yeah.
By,
Well, and it's also our time to remember, as you say, our ancestors.
yeah,
Like who made what happen such that
yeah.
you would be the dean of Grace Cathedral.
Right, completely. That a small group of people in California in 1849 would form this church. That the first rector would go and basically minister to these people who mutinied on one of the gold ships and were going to be hanged at dawn. Right. I mean, all those. I mean, like the gold store, the first collection has gold dust in the plate. Yeah, you're right. I mean, and all the way to like the labor movements of the 30s when the cathedral and the Diocese of California stood up in favor of the labor unions, and we lost the funding for the building, and the AIDS crisis, women's rights in the 70s and in the 60s. I think one of the first women deacons in the Episcopal Church was ordained here. But there's so many ways in which our ancestors were carrying on this struggle, and then there's ways in which we fell short too.
Absolutely. And we have to be mindful that we are future ancestors.
Yeah, right, completely.
Right? So, asking the question about our own legacies.
Yeah.
Right? What are we handing down to our next generation? What is a world that we're making for the next and the next and the next?
Yeah. One of the things I've been dying to ask you about,
Jeez.
and Greg and I were talking about this
Yeah.
also. You come more from like an East Coast tradition, and you're here in the West.
Yep.
And I would love it if you could just speak about just what that was like, just personally to grow up in the kind of the setting where Asians are in where you grew up,
Yep.
Versus like Los Angeles, which has a huge Korean community,
Yeah.
and we have a very different kind of local culture.
Yep.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you've learned and noticed as
Yeah.
you've been out here.
Well, I mean, growing up look, I was, as I said, I was a first-generation immigrant.
Yeah.
I came to Massachusetts in the 60s, which was not necessarily the most
Which
racially...
town were you in?
In Worcester.
Worcester.
All right. But, not the most racially progressive place.
No, completely.
Right? And then growing up in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Where we were one of a small number of Korean families, one of a small number of Asian American families there. And, that feeling of being minoritized both demographically but also culturally.
Yeah.
Being othered not simply as for racial reasons, but a whole host of things.
Yeah.
Where the unwanted lessons about white supremacy were there very early.
Yeah.
I grew up in that context, went to school in that context, raised kids in that context. And, by the time I made my way here to the Bay, I have to say, coming to the Bay felt like coming home, even though I had never lived here for any amount of time.
Yeah.
There was something about the natural or kind of seemingly unapologetic commitment to multiracial community.
Yeah.
And multiracial solidarity. And this is we're far from living out in nirvana.
Right. Oh my gosh,
Right.
completely.
There are schisms and so on.
Yeah.
But the ways in which we don't have to argue for the facts of demography
Yeah.
and a complex demography, that we and that you have decades, if not centuries, of traditions of multiracial existence, coexistence. I won't say it's refreshing, but I say it came as a comfort.
Yeah.
Right. And again, there's so much work to be done. No advance again is permanent.
Right. Right. With the way you've described California, it's almost like how I feel about Hawaii, where where white people are not in a majority,
Yep.
and there's just a very different developed culture.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting because I think we're in the midst of such big changes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, how was California for you? I mean, you went to school here?
Yeah, I in some ways I feel like the greater country is kind of going what through California already went through.
Yeah.
So I think of George Duke-Majan and Pete Wilson during the 90s.
Yep.
I think of like all the anti-immigration
Yep.
legislation, anti-immigration, the legislation against gay
Yep.
marriages that were happening in the 90s. And all of it was kind of in anticipation of just kind of an entrenched white supremacist ruling party,
Yep.
kind of seeing the writing on the wall,
Yeah.
and kind of panicking about
Yeah.
that, and then just going over to the other side where whites may not be in a majority anymore, and things are going great.
Things are going well, but
Well, I mean,
we have our own bicoastalism in California, right? Where San Francisco,
yeah, for sure.
California,
And-
LA,
Yeah, and then
but you also have
where
red counties here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when I was getting ordained in the Central Valley, I as part of like the interview process,
Yeah.
people were asking me, "What do you think about gay marriage?" In like 1990,
Yeah.
because if I didn't pass the litmus test, they're going to cut me.
So what did you say?
I told them I was in favor of gay marriage. I mean, it was so obvious to me. I mean,
Right.
for me, it's like it's a family issue. It's just
Right.
like the people I love the most in the world are gay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm just like it was a really easy one for me.
But I love that frame though of calling it a family issue,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Or it's a family affair. Why? Because families are we have our families of origin,
yep,
and we have our chosen families.
yeah, exactly.
And if I think about the incredibly diverse backgrounds in which my chosen family comes,
Yeah,
and people for whom
Yeah.
they make my life what it is.
yeah,
in the
I
best.
feel the same way about you, David. I
I-
learned so
right
much
here.
from you over so many years.
Yeah.
I always feel like I'm kind of like your little brother. I'm like it's 2 steps behind you. And
Not at no.
but you know
Listen,
what's so
listen.
interesting to me, and this is something that's just you're probably you're at the forefront of this. You know, I think our understanding of race is changing and developing in the academy, in the intellectual world. I just feel like young people today, the way they talk, who I interact with and who I
Yeah.
talk to, I mean, there is a way in which they're so much more savvy,
Oh, yeah.
so much more intelligent. Like I do, like a 20-year-old may not be able to teach me a lot about Schopenhauer, but that 20-year-old can teach me tons about how different races interact. You know, what we are doing about trans rights and trans. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that too, just because I do see you as kind of one of those experts in race, and maybe you can talk a little bit about just the ways in which we've made progress and our intellectual understanding of race in the last 20 years.
Well, I mean, I think the progress, you're right, it's born out of the generation that we're witnessing now, these young folks.
Yeah.
Where, and again, they're not a monolith.
Yeah, completely, exactly.
But the I guess, what would you call it, the more progressive-minded amongst them have understood, why we got here, how we got here.
Yeah.
As you say, they're unapologetic in advocating for not just racial equality, but racial freedom.
Yeah.
And amongst the most beautiful things is their commitment to racial complexity.
Yeah.
There's a kind of stubbornness that we hold certain racial identities.
Yeah.
And, Koreans are like this, and,
Right.
black folks are like this, and so on. And, when you talk to young folks, it's not even that it's an insistence on fluidity, but it's a living of it.
Yeah.
And that's an amazingly beautiful thing to witness.
Yeah.
And so, just as you say, like, we can learn from them. Now, it's not that they have all the answers.
No, not at all. But they're like I said, they speak in much more mature ways, and they're aware of issues that I overlook. And I'm so grateful for them in that way. Can you talk a little bit about just like what you were teaching, and just kind of what kind of classes you were working with? And
Oh, sure.
yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to think of like the classes I've really taught me in many ways.
That's what I was really
Yeah.
getting at.
Yeah. I mean, so actually, Cornel and I did a course a while ago, 7 years ago, on radical love.
Oh yeah, great. Oh my
And I did another one more recently called Love and Justice. And it's funny, like these courses that are, big ideas, either overly simplified or incredibly complex, really challenged me to be more explicit about what I believe and understand and what I don't.
Yeah.
Right? And so, we might, as Christians, as Confucians, might say, like, we understand instinctively what the relationship between love and justice is.
Right.
But then asking to articulate that in a way for folks who do not exist in the same spheres of life.
Yeah.
But then also to say, how do we speak about it in a way that has purposeful impact on the world?
Yeah.
And there's so much of that work that needs to be done where what we're doing is really building a language of, a new vernacular, a spiritually rich way in which we can express what it is to live love and justice together. And so, we'd read James Baldwin, we'd read, Cornel and other folks where, it's, again, like not about declarations about how we get love and justice right, but asking those better questions. What is it when love flags? What is it when justice fails us?
Right.
And how do we commit or find ourselves committed to a faith that we can reconnect and rebuild that relationship? And we're living that moment now.
Yeah. I wonder what kind of like long-term projects you have in mind that are occupying your attention and your imagination right now. Like, like what are you thinking about in terms of just like what you're going to be working on, what you're going to be bringing to the world?
So we have a big project underway called the Hope Index.
Right. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, this is an idea that if we can create cultural metrics, which is not about counting things, but ways of gauging how the culture is doing, moving away from senses of cynicism, moving away from kind of senses of depletion and spiritual exhaustion,
Yeah.
To help co-create cultures of possibility.
Oh, I like that.
Right? And so that, when we are at our best, we imagine a future. When we are at our best, we imagine, a full humanity.
Yeah.
And so the Hope Index will be bringing together, thinkers, media makers, artists, all sorts of folks, working with companies, working with, philanthropic organizations, communities, to say, well, what is it that we can do together to build a culture of hope?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love it. I think it's such important work. I can't wait to see how it
Thank you.
Unfolds as you
Yeah.
go forward.
Yeah.
You're a scholar of religion, a student of religion, and I find so often that the media just has that story of just like institutional religious decay and decline, and I understand that why those make compelling stories, but I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just like what you see, how you see religion changing and adapting, and just from your perspective.
Well, look, I think religion is no one thing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And those stories, as you say, in the media, we've read for decades.
Yeah, yeah.
The thing that, I know you did this in your own work, and I try to do it in my own way. What are the questions that religion is raising? What do we do in the face of mortality?
Yeah.
What do we do in the midst of despair?
Yeah.
What do we do in the crisis of meaning? It's not that religions or religious institutions will always be the best resources for that.
Right, right.
And often they fail.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the criticisms of religious institutions right now are very well
Yeah,
warranted.
I agree,
right?
exactly.
Having said that, those human questions aren't going to go away.
Yeah.
And so it's incumbent upon folks like you, folks like myself, to say, well, how do we address this so that the inheritance of the dysfunctions, say, of institutional religions don't overshadow the beautiful lessons that can come.
Right, totally.
Right? And again, like to engage in this prophetic practice, to understand that the commitment to probing religion isn't about introducing an unwanted player in the political sphere, for example.
Right.
But it's to say, well, there are people who are suffering, and shouldn't it be the case that we are open to all possible means of addressing that suffering?
Yeah.
There are people who simply do not understand what to do.
Yeah.
Rife with anxiety.
Right.
Beaten down.
Right.
And the religious traditions, at their best, are amongst the most robust and powerful expressions of addressing those concerns.
Yeah.
We have to always make that argument.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I see every single Sunday. I just think it's an amazing thing to be part of a community. It's like nobody invited them.
Yeah.
There weren't ticket prices that were advertised on. It's not like a rock concert or a basketball game where you kind of go and have an individual experience amongst this huge crowd. We're actually asking people to really interact with each other, and we just have no idea who's going to show up. It's like God invites them all, and it'll never be the same either. When I first saw you, at Grace Cathedral on a Sunday, I was like, oh my gosh, how many chances do we have like this in our life?
Right.
And it reminds you of just like the singularity of that experience.
Well, and it's such a blessing to be a part of a convening.
Yeah, completely.
Where
so right.
What is it to call to gather people?
Yeah.
And in a way where it's as you say, it's done willingly, not by obligation, but in a sense like I need to be here.
Yeah.
And don't we want more of that in our lives?
Yeah, completely. And there, even when you were describing the Hope Index, there is a way in which things just feel more hopeful when you're with other people, even if you're getting together at a moment of despair, like at a funeral or after a terrible thing's happened in society, and you find yourself in a place that kind of draws you towards like a transcendence. There is something that just is like profoundly feeds our souls in doing that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. It's I feel like I do feel so blessed that we have religious institutions, and Temple Emmanuel in San Francisco, and we just had an iftar dinner with our Muslim brothers and sisters as part of San Francisco Interfaith Council, and that's another thing I really love is that interreligious experience too.
They're also just, occasions and settings to feel blessed.
Yeah.
My younger son was baptized in the Episcopal Church.
Oh, yeah, right.
And it's not that I was raised.
Yeah.
But, I remember for his baptismal service, his older brother at the time was quite shy.
Yeah.
And, wasn't really drawn to adults and so on. And the minister who was about to baptize Josiah, my younger one, reaches over to Noah and says, "Would you like to take the scallop shell?" Right?
Yeah.
And he just went like this and lifted his arms toward her, and I just wept.
Yeah.
And to bear witness to that moment of connection, where this very shy boy opened his heart up to someone he didn't really know that well.
Right.
And I'll never forget that.
Yeah. There's a lot of moments that happen in Grace Cathedral that are just so transformative. You do have a sense of just walking in there of that. Yeah. We have a tradition as part of the forum.
Sure.
Let me tell you, normal forums are so fun. There's like a whole crowd in an auditorium.
You're not about to say, unlike this one?
No, this is great. I mean, for me, this is absolutely my dream. I mean, this is my chance to ask you all these questions I've wanted to ask you, but, just not.
I was so appreciate this.
Yeah, no, this is so great. But what we do is we ask people to write little questions on note cards.
Oh, great.
And so people send in questions. So we have one question that says, what are some of the important issues for faith communities with respect to Asian America right now? Oh yeah, I was going to ask this too. The anti-Asian violence issue is top of mind for most Asian American groups, but has been sort of passed over in the media after Trump. What can the churches be doing to help in this? And what other areas of concern for Asian America that the church could lead?
Well, listen, I mean, I take the point of the question, but I don't think that's the case that people have lost.
I think this is what he was saying in an earlier version of talking to this person about this. He was talking about just like the media attention. It's just like, just it's like a spotlight, and it's just moves on.
No, for sure.
So
but I was just in New York City yesterday, and I was thinking about this. I'm standing on a subway platform.
Yeah, right, completely.
And I've been on a subway platform in New York thousands of times.
Yes, yeah.
But I had a moment where I thought, is someone going to come up and shove me onto the tracks?
Right.
And it didn't last, but just that flash of anxiety is a reflection of what's going on in the culture.
Completely.
And what might the church do? I mean, I think the church is already doing a lot for the activists that are out front. So my friend Russell Jung, for example, one of the founders of Stop AAPI Hate, is a lifelong Christian, sees this as part of his Christian witness, and the churches. The temples, they're organizing folks. Yeah, this is an example of when a church or otherwise, religious institution or otherwise, can serve as a real resource. Yeah, as a refuge, and not to say they won't do it; they'll do it all the time. And you will watch leadership here, right? Our Asian American ministers or others. Stepping up in this moment and saying no, but also stepping up when this is happening for Black folks, when this is happening for Latinos, when it's happening for Indigenous folks and Muslim folks, right? So that it's not just when our folks get hurt, but we understand our obligations to bear witness, to speak truth to power, and recognizing that the attention that Asian Americans may have gotten for a moment, or maybe still do. Is attention that we need to draw to other folks as well.
Yeah, one of the things, like I'm the world's best expert on Melancholic Freedom right now. Just like for an instant, because I'm the person in the world who's read it most recently and examined it and studied it. I love the category of melancholy as being feeling a sense of love for something that's no longer there, but which we can't let it go anymore.
The inability to mourn.
The inability to mourn. That's exactly right. And I think it's so helpful for so many people to understand a little bit more about it. But I wonder, just as you think about some of the ideas that you had as you were working on this important book, like how have things changed, do you think,
Oh.
in terms of your own thinking? And then
Yeah.
just, I mean, the world just kind of throws new things at
Yeah,
us,
yeah.
and so I wonder if just, how's the world changed since you've written this, and how
Yeah,
have
I
your
mean, yeah, no,
views
thank you. I
changed?
mean, I appreciate the question. I think if I were to write it today, I would talk about melancholy and maturity.
Yeah, interesting.
Because if you think about like we were talking about earlier about radical love, like, it's often when we are the least mature about certain things that we can't let things go.
Yeah, yeah,
And, so we were talking about civil rights earlier, we're talking about, a sense of American prosperity and possibility. We have to let those things go. And, from a standpoint of maturity, which is, say, a reflection that our spirits are mature, that we have emotional maturity,
yeah,
and that we can say, okay, this didn't work out as we had hoped and planned.
yeah.
Our civil rights framework, our religious frameworks,
Right.
Our faith commitments
Yeah.
are not what the great faith traditions and just the great theological traditions
Yeah.
were all about reformation
Right.
and reconstruction,
Completely, that's true.
right?
Yeah.
And you got, in a sense in which authority did not live up to its promise.
Yeah. Did anybody ever tell you that like this is like the most profoundly Protestant book? I mean, just like the idea of like vocation is so
Yeah.
central
It
to
is.
it.
It is.
Do you know what I mean? And I love that. I mean, it just like to think of Martin Luther and
Yep.
his idea of vocation. I mean, I just remember from I mean, you obviously are familiar with Martin Luther's
Sure.
works, but it's not like you were like living with Martin Luther's collected works on your bookshelf. Do you know what I mean? But that idea of vocation is just like so central, and I think that is an important connection between civil rights and between social justice and just the Christian way of life, the Christian viewpoint.
Well, and this idea of vocation isn't just about profession, right?
Yeah, completely.
It's a sense in which we are called to be and do something. Often, with reluctance. We talked about the prophets earlier. The prophets, most of the prophets did not go along saying, "Yes, I'm a
Thanks,
prophet.
God,
Thank
I'm
you."
on it.
Like, I'm on it. Right? It's a sense in which, there's hesitation, even ambivalence, uncertainty.
Yeah,
But, to quote Luther, "Here I stand, I can do no other."
yeah, exactly.
Right? I have no choice in the matter.
Yeah,
Not because I'm forced to it, but in the sense of like my true self, my self of integrity demands that I do this.
yeah, yeah.
And don't we want more of that?
Yeah, completely. And I think there is something in us that's not satisfied with the way we look at the world, and we see, we see young black men being killed, and we see this terrible war in Ukraine, and we see that just, I was walking with my son, and I said, when I was a young man, this whole landscape it's hard to describe what it was like before the drought.
Right.
You didn't see trees that were dying everywhere. You weren't in the middle of this massive landscape that's completely being altered by climate change. And so there is, there is this dissatisfactions are already in us, and in a way.
But also you're bearing witness to decay.
Yeah, yeah,
And to say to your son, not in a way, well, it was different when I was younger, but it's to say that, I can see the decline in, with my
it's
own
in
eyes.
front of us.
Right.
Exactly.
And so what are you going to do in response to that?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I wonder just like what you made of just like the Trump years and just, just kind of where we were collectively during that period of time.
Oh, gosh.
I kept thinking about, melancholic,
Yeah. No. It's a good question. I mean, the Trump years in many ways were a real spiritual test.
Yeah.
I think I, along with many people, sat in disbelief about what was happening.
Yeah.
And, I felt this on election day in 2016 that, we knew what was coming.
Yeah. And we tried not to believe it.
Yeah, but we knew what was coming.
Yeah.
And there's, the thing I had said to many folks, when I was in public talks and otherwise, I would say, don't get used to this.
Yeah.
Be reminded, and I would use this language, be reminded that there is evil in the world.
Yeah.
And just because it's an inhabitant of one of our central offices of power. Be reminded that there's evil in the world and that we have to be responsible for rectifying evil.
Yeah.
It was a relentless time. It was an exhausting time, spiritually depleting.
Yeah.
But again, we have to remind ourselves of who we are.
Right. Exactly.
And we're the people that we came from. And I'm still, I have to say that even to myself. You got to remind ourselves of who we are.
Yeah, it's so true. I often, I wonder if Donald Trump would have ever been elected if it weren't for Twitter, for instance. Twitter's just down the hill. Elon Musk just bought it, and there it is, just like I could skateboard there in like 7 minutes,
Right.
5 minutes if I didn't stop at any of the stop signs. But I wonder too what because you too, you're savvy about social media, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about these massive technological changes and how they're affecting kind of the body politic and the spiritual and mental health of all of us.
Well, I when we were talking earlier about Nextness, the thing I worry about social media is it brings us away from these connections to each other.
Right.
Having said that, I have been reconnected with folks over social media.
Right, totally.
But it's not life.
Yeah.
And one of the things I hope for a moment is that we remind ourselves of what robust human life can look like.
Yeah.
That we get, the social media can obscure our humanity.
Yeah.
Not even can, it does obscure our humanity.
Right.
And I don't mean this just as the forms of distraction, but the ways in which we lose our powers of attention and attentiveness, our sense of presence and purpose. We can hand-wring about the loss of purpose and meaning, but look at how we're spending our time.
Yeah, so true. I had a friend of mine who was incarcerated, and I would go and see him. I was like, "You're going to be the last person in America who can focus and, pay attention to something."
Right.
Because we're all of us so distracted all the time. And I do think we're always giving each other so much more subconsciously. We're always taking in so much more than we're aware of.
Right.
And I think that's part of the reason why we just need to be together. It's so funny because on the one hand, I'm presiding over this like massive change in Grace Cathedral where, 700, 800 people or whatever number it is are watching every Sunday, thousands of people tuning in over a course of a week. And you think, so on the one hand, we're making that possible.
Yep.
So people aren't just dying in convalescent hospitals and don't have some kind of connection to our community. And yet at the same time, we're also kind of an antidote to like online all the time.
Right.
And it's interesting just to be operating both those things at the same time. And I do think I'm almost like, it's like when the movable type, like Gutenberg's Bible, it's just like all of a sudden it's going to be a massive change globally, and we don't really know how to do it yet.
Also that we have more control over it than we will.
Yeah, that's true too. And especially as individuals,
that's right.
We're the ones who decide how much it's going to drive our consciousness.
That's right.
How much it's going to affect what our sense of identity. Yeah. I wonder if you can talk a little bit just about what you see as signs of hope these days. Because hope is just totally a word I associate with you.
Yeah. Well, you talked about young people. If it were not for teaching, I think my spirit would have been depleted a long time ago.
Yeah, interesting.
Right. But the pushback to oppression, whether it's in the Ukraine, whether it's in Palestine, whether it's in the United States.
Yeah.
Those are signs of hope.
Yeah.
But we need to convert hope from episodic events to deep-rooted culture.
Yeah.
And, you and I have talked about this many times before, that, amongst the most insidious ways in which hope gets undermined is cynicism.
Yeah.
Where people are keeping their hearts away from the world.
Yeah.
I'll take, you mentioned this earlier, the trans rights movement.
Oh yeah.
Is to me an incredible.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It's so inspiring to me.
And that they transform the culture so swiftly.
Completely.
And I thought, okay.
Yeah.
Listen, if we can do that, or
right.
that can happen in such a swift amount of time, that's a sign of hope.
Yeah. You're so right. And for people I know who've just been so put down
Mhm.
and been able to find their communities
Oh, yeah.
and
Oh,
been
yeah.
able to reach out and
Yeah.
empower other
It's a
people.
beautiful thing. It's
It's
a really
yeah.
beautiful thing.
Yeah, I do. I feel very blessed by people who I have in my life like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're totally inspiring figures. Yeah, and have a lot to teach us.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe the bells are ringing already. It's just like, did the bells just ring like 3 minutes ago? I've been looking forward to this so much, and
Thank you.
it
Thank you
definitely
for having me.
is
I
what a
mean, you know,
blessing.
this institution is so blessed to have you lead them, and you know, I'm blessed to have your friendship for so long.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I'm glad that we're going to be able to get old together. The other thing that's wonderful too is I think as our children are,
Mm-hmm.
we have fewer responsibilities for our children, even though we'll always be there
Sure.
for them. But I do think it is opening up new spaces in our lives so that we
Yeah,
can have
absolutely.
those adult friendships that matter so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Our next forum is on Wednesday, May 11th at 5 p.m. Mark Andrus, Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of California, will be talking to presiding Bishop Michael Curry about the initiative End Slavery for Good and the work to remove the loophole for involuntary servitude in the 13th Amendment. That's what we're working on super hard here,
Wow.
by the way. It's just like,
That's
we're going to
amazing.
change the Constitution. No one's going to be enslaved in America.
Wow.
Anyway, it's our big ambition. We rely on your support for the forum. Gifts of any size make a difference. You can give on gracecathedral.org or by texting THINK, T-H-I-N-K, to 76278. So 76278. And thanks again to David Kim.
Thank
and we're so grateful for you and look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you.
Yeah. Good night, everyone.